Welcome back, class, to another lecture here in our apologetics course. And today we begin to really start to talk about what people think of when they hear the word apologetics, answering those tough questions. Today we're going to start with the existence of God. And I want you to notice the order that we put this in. The existence of God is covered before the reliability of scriptures, and that's intentional. What I want you to understand from an apologetic standpoint, and this may even sound heretical at first, so listen closely. You don't need a Bible to prove the existence of God. You don't need a Bible to know God exists. Now, I know that sounds almost oxymoronic or paradoxical or reverse psychology, because we think, why would I surrender my best weapon? What I want you to think through is, did Adam know God existed? Did he know that? Well, yeah. Did he have a Bible? No. Did Moses know that God existed? Yes. But did he have a Bible? No. Did Abraham know? Did Enoch know? Did Paul know? And we say, well, Paul had some of the Bible. He didn't have all of the Bible. Only one person out of all of the characters in Scripture, one human person, had the potential. We're not even sure that he had it, but he at least had the potential to have all 66 books of our canonized Bible, and that's John, after he wrote the Revelation. Outside of John, every other person you read about, all of the kings, all of the priests, all of the prophets, all of the apostles, all of the pastors, church leaders, missionaries, etc., every single person you read about, not one had a Bible to know that God existed. So, when we start with the arguments for God, we do so intentionally because we are going to establish, first of all, that a God exists. Now, to be fair, and to be transparent, and to be totally honest, and we have to be as apologists, the arguments we present today do not prove that Jehovah, the God of the Bible, is the one true God who exists. What today does, it opens up the realm of possibility that there is a divine creator, and then we have to identify him. And we identify him, next step, through the word that he has revealed. So, that's sort of the progression that we're going into. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you. Chuck Colson wrote an interesting statement years ago. He said, if your culture and our culture is to be transformed, that's what we want, right? If our culture is to be transformed, it happens from the bottom up. From ordinary believers practicing apologetics over the backyard fence or around the barbecue grill. Not in a big lecture hall with hundreds of people listening to an apologetic debate. Not in a church service or in a Bible college class. But when I talk with our neighbors, one-on-one, engage them, hear their questions, answer their questions, help them understand a biblical worldview, which we talked about previously. That's how culture gets changed. So, the question concerning whether a God exists, it's been debated from time immemorial. Even if we did not question in pre-flood history the existence of God, from the very beginning there was a question of what type of God existed. Satan, from the very beginning in the garden, planted that seed. Is he a good God, though? Can you trust him? Is he holding out on you? There's always been a question either about God's existence or, if he does exist, if he's good. Those are two different questions. We don't cover them both in this lecture. But what we do cover in this lecture is his existence. So, were the pagan gods of Canaan real? Were the gods of Greece real? Were the gods of Egypt real? Were the gods of Rome real? In the first century, our forefathers, believers, Christians, were actually called atheists. It sounds funny to say that now, Because in our mind, an atheist is someone who denies the existence of God and says, there is no God. But in the first century, Christians were called atheists because they only worshiped one God and denied all of the Roman pantheon or the Greek pantheon of gods. And so they were viewed as atheistic, which is sort of ironic when you think about the way the culture has changed today. In the first century, they were viewed as atheists because they denied the right of worship to lesser gods. Geisler stated, "This cannot mean that there is no evidence for God's existence for the atheist. Since Paul has declared in Romans that the evidence for God's existence is so plain to render them without excuse, even if they've never heard the gospel." So, this is a question we need to learn how to answer. So let's look at a few Bible verses to get started. Let's start in Genesis chapter number 1, sort of hit the ground running with the very first verse of the Scriptures. And the Bible says, "In the beginning." The beginning of what? Well, the beginning of creation, sure, but also the beginning of time. So when you have time, in the beginning, time, God created, there's material, matter. God created the heaven, that's space, and the earth. So God, in Genesis 1:1, there is a creator God who has all the elements of our universe, time, space, and matter. In the beginning, God created. Notice, there's no defense for God's existence. It's just a declaration. And the declaration is predicated upon the fact that we can see what he did. He created. Okay? Now, that's the very first drop, if you will, in the Bible. Now, Paul takes that same line of argument in Romans chapter number 1. Let's turn there, and then we're going to talk about a few things that deal with the existence of God. But Romans chapter number 1, and if you haven't taken this course yet, I hope that you will take it. It's a course I enjoy teaching, the book of Romans. But as Paul comes to the first 16 or 17 verses, he's walking through his commendation for this church, his prayer for this church, his thanksgiving for the gospel's work in their lives. He reminds them that he is not ashamed. The gospel that has worked in their life, he's not ashamed of it because he knows it's the power of God and the salvation to everyone that believes. So he's ready to preach the gospel to you at Rome and anywhere else. He's ready. And then he says that when the gospel is preached, verse 17, this is when the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. So from one degree of faith to another degree of faith, from the Old Testament revelation to the New Testament revelation, by means of the gospel, God's righteousness is being revealed. And the takeaway is that those who are justified, the just ones, they learn to live and walk by faith. So, that's the first 17 verses, sort of a prologue to the whole book. Now verse 18, he shifts. Moving from the righteousness of God being revealed, he now says, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness, all unrighteous men who hold the truth. They hold it down, they suppress it with their unrighteous deeds, because that which may be known of God, it's not unknown, it's knowable, it's known of God. It has been manifested unto them, it's been shown to them, it's been demonstrated unto them. God did this, God showed it unto them. Verse 19. How? The invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Even, here's what we understand, his eternal power, his Godhead, leaving us without excuse. The atheist has no excuse. It is not that an atheist has no evidence for God's existence. The issue is the atheist has evidence he will not accept for God's existence. It isn't that there is no evidence. There's evidence. But the atheist has said in his heart, there is no God. The atheist who once knew God refuses to glorify him as God, and now God is turning him over. So in Romans chapter number 1, the wrath of God is revealed, not unjustly, but justly, because that which can be known about God, his power and his Godhead, are clearly evident in creation. Now, nature, creation, general revelation, tells us nothing about salvation, tells us nothing about holiness, tells us nothing about heaven or hell. All it does is establish the fact there's a creator to whom I'm accountable to, and whoever this creator is, he's very, very powerful because he's done all of this. And he is far above man, far above anything I can contemplate. He is deity, he is Godhead, he is the one worthy of worship. And so, evidence from God. Now let's start first of all. Now I know at the beginning I said we don't start with Scripture in apologetics. Okay, so typically in an apologetic reasoning, when we talk about the existence of God, we have some primary arguments we're going to use. And I will get there. But, since this is a Bible college setting, I want to establish as believers, when we talk to one another, we establish our faith, our final authority, on the Scriptures. And so I want to make sure that we ground our discussion upon the authority of Scripture, and once we're grounded in it, then we can move from that foundation and share some of the other arguments to unbelievers to draw them back to the Scriptures. We have a supernatural record, you and I do, of who God is and what He has done. These Scriptures form the final authority for our matters of faith, what we believe, and our matters of practice, how we behave, how we process, how we act and interact. The Bible doesn't defend God's existence, it declares it. We talked about this in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. Romans 1, I've mentioned. There is another verse I would like to mention to you as well. Psalm 19 says this: the heavens, creation, the heavens, literally declare. They shout out. They declare the glory of God. It shows His handiwork. The heavens do that. Creation does that. And it's not just, if I can give you something to think about, sort of tangent to this conversation, it isn't just that the creation declares the glory of God. Specifically in Psalm 19, David says the heavens declare God's glory. And there's an interesting book. I would challenge you to find it and read it. You can download it for free online because of public domain issues. It's a book written by E.W. Bullinger, I would venture to say over 100 years ago. And in this book, I'm sure it's over 100 years ago. In this book, the title is called The Witness of the Stars. Maybe it's The Witness to the Stars, but I think it's The Witness of the Stars. But if you Google Bullinger, Bullinger, Witness Near Stars, you're going to find this book, okay? The premise is this: the constellations, they're not random. And they're not astrological in the sense of you can foretell your horoscope. That's not what God created that for. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe the constellations were placed there by God? Now I know, before you answer that, I know that there has been a connotation to this that our culture has wrapped around the constellations. And so because of the connotation, we have a filter over our lens. We have a filter that we're seeing the stars. Oh, and there's a Leo, and I was born in August, I'm a Leo. And so we talk like that. And, you know, there's the people who follow their horoscopes, and there's people who really believe that the stars can predict their future. I get all of that. I don't think any of us would say that's why God created it. But I do remember in the book of Genesis where God placed these lights and the stars in the skies for signs. And I wonder if those signs could tell a story. I wonder if the signs in the heavens are declaring something. Now, it's a fascinating study. I'd love to just lecture on it. That's not the purpose of this class. But I challenge you to sort of look that up and sort of add that to your apologetic arsenal, or at least your understanding of a biblical worldview from the psalmist's perspective. So Psalm 19 is a great a passage. So 3 passages so far: Genesis 1, Psalm 19, Romans 1. And now we can add to that John 1. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. All things were made by Him. That's verse 3. Hebrews 1, verse 3, again tells us that by whom the world, He framed the worlds. He made this. Colossians 1, 16 and 17. He's made everything. It's all under His dominion. Things in the earth, things above the earth, things under the earth, all under His dominion. So, John 1, Colossians 1, Hebrews 1, Romans 1, Psalm 19, Genesis 1, sort of giving us a biblical perspective. Now, we could spend a lot more time there, but I just want to make sure that we have some biblical anchor points for the existence of God, that we're not just starting an argument for something we assume. We're about to argue for the existence of God because we have a firm anchor, you and I, as believers. All right, so with that in mind, we'll start this lecture with our first argument. An argument from observation and reason. An argument from observation and reason. There are arguments that we give that some of them are based upon our observation, some of them are more deductive, and they're based on reason. The field of apologetics has provided, supplied believers with multiple arguments for the existence of God. And here's the good news. You don't have to be proficient in all of them. You can find the tool that fits your hand the best and practice it and work with it. You know, I have tools in my toolbox that are perfect for me. I have a sledgehammer that I use when needed. But when my daughters were 3 and 4 years old, I didn't challenge them to use it. Now, it wasn't a problem with the tool. The problem was it didn't fit where they were. So when they wanted to hammer something like Dad was hammering, I found them one of those little ping hammers, and I just sort of let them ping around. And we started with plastic, little toys, and so they started with that, and then they upgraded to a little ball ping hammer, and then maybe more of just a household hammer, and then a little bit bigger, and on and on. So as they matured, they could use different tools. There was always a tool they could use, but they couldn't always use all of the tools. And so I approach apologetics that way. I don't expect you to become a master of every single argument. This is an introductory class. Now, if you say, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to grow up, back that up, rewind that tape. If you say, I hope one day by God's will I'm going to be an apologist, okay, then you need to probably spend a little more time with these. But if you're the person who says, you know, I'm in ministry and sometimes I get questions asked me and I just want to be able to answer them, find 1 or 2 of these arguments and you should be sufficient. So, within our fundamental belief system, it's imperative for you and I that we can defend the Bible to show that Jesus is God in the flesh. Get it? We have to defend the resurrection. Get it? And we use the Bible for that. And all of our beliefs about heaven and hell and when Jesus is coming back, all of that's grounded in the Bible. But that's not necessarily where we start. We're proving the existence of God. So our first argument, there are 3 of them. Our first argument is called the teleological argument. It's a fancy word. Teleological. T-E-L-E-O, logical. You say, those new words scare me. Sometimes that does for people. So let me just calm you for a minute. Even if you've never heard the word, you've heard the concept. Here's how it sort of gets marketed in today's vernacular. Intelligent design. That's what teleological is. From the Greek word is teleos. It means order. It means design. It's the opposite of chaos. The teleological word, it comes from an idea of purpose. It comes from the idea of a goal. It comes from the idea of design. There's an end in mind. It's designed with a purpose. It's designed with a goal. It's not random. It's not chaotic. It's not coincidental. It's not by chance. This is what's embedded in the idea of a teleological argument. It's the argument from design. A simple definition then, if I'm just trying to remember it, teleological order and design. This appearance of design Wherever you look, there's an appearance of design. And that appearance, listen closely, that appearance of design, quote unquote, the appearance of design is even conceded by evolutionists. It's conceded even by atheists. Richard Dawkins, one of the more influential four primary guys in the 2010 era that sort of led this wave of the new brand of atheism, sort of a new horseman, if you will. And Richard Dawkins was one of those leading that charge. He wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker. If you're not familiar with the world of science, in the 1800s there was a guy named William Paley. And Paley he came up with an argument: if you find a watch in a forest, there must have been a watchmaker. It didn't just evolve over time from a scrap heap of metal. And the idea is there was design. Obviously, if there's design, there's a designer. And so Dawkins says, okay, let's take Paley's argument and there's a blind watchmaker. It may look like a watchmaker, but it's really not. So biology, here's Richard Dawkins' statement. Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Let me rephrase Dawkins' definition of biology. We need biology to help us do away with this appearance of design by saying there's no designer. Biology can help us to get away from saying the appearance of design implies a designer, and it can help us find another alternative. Now, that was not the purpose of biology, but it's what it's being commandeered to do today. It's being commandeered to be used as a way to find an alternative to get around the argument of design. William Dembski, Sean McDowell, wrote this: "Here then is a question worth pondering. If a creature looks like a dog, smells like a dog, barks like a dog, feels like a dog, pants like a dog, doesn't the burden of proof lie with the person who insists the creature isn't a dog? Generally speaking, the burden of proof lies with those who deny our natural intuitions about the world." And this comes back to the lecture we had on tactics and understanding who has the burden of proof. Now here's what happens. We have all of this evidence that mounts, that gives the appearance of proof, and then the atheist wants to shift the burden of proof to the theist and say, well, prove it. And Dembski and McDowell are pushing back and saying, no, wait a second. If it looks like it has the appearance of design, if it looks like there's order, and if all natural intuitions point to the fact it has been designed, then shouldn't the burden of proof be upon you to prove otherwise? Doesn't it seem ironic that science would have a branch called SETI, which is looking for the extraterrestrial signs of life? There's a whole branch that looks for extraterrestrial intelligence while adamantly stating that there are no signs of intelligent design on our own planet. And design actually is observed in a number of ways. Let me just share a few of them with you, just to give you some ammunition, if you will. Galaxies. Our galaxies. The Milky Way is where we live, and it's compared with other galaxies and what you find throughout the universe. Astronomers have observed there's different types of galaxies. There's elliptical, there's spiral, there's irregular, there's lenticular. The Milky Way is a spiral galaxy. It's considered the only kind of galaxy that can support life. So out of the countless innumerable galaxies that exist, there's a subset of those, and only those, that can actually support life as we know it. In 2015, fairly recent, a major study suggested that elliptical galaxies were actually better for life, not spiral, which the Milky Way is. And so science was saying, no, actually we're in the wrong galaxy. If we'd have been in an elliptical galaxy, it would have been even better. And so they debated this for 5 years. In 2020, that theory was debunked. Spiral galaxies were once again confirmed to be the best galaxies suited for life. There are hundreds of billions of galaxies in our universe today, but we live in one that is specifically designed for life to exist. In our solar system, there are stars there. Most secular universities teach that stars formed due to collapsing hydrogen gas clouds billions and billions and billions of years ago. Jason Lau explains this. Most people are unaware that there are serious scientific problems with such notions. Looking at the evidence points to the majesty and power of the Creator God, not an evolutionary origin. The stars, simply put, they can't be billions of years old. Each star, according to 1 Corinthians 15:41, they all differ in their glory. Each star is unique in its brightness and its color, and the colors range from red to blue. Each star is unique. There is an element of design to it. Think about our ecosystem with a sun and a moon and an earth. A gentleman by the name of Mark Water discusses some of these evidences for design in this system. Consider the color of our parent star, the sun. If it were redder, if it were bluer on that scale that I just mentioned with the stars, the planet would be too cool to have a stable water cycle, and water's pretty important for life. If our planet were closer, or let's say if it was redder or bluer, also we would not have a photosynthetic response that's needed. Photosynthesis has a neat little byproduct to it. It's called oxygen. It's sort of important. If we didn't have photosynthesis, there wouldn't be sufficient oxygen for us to breathe. There's a design to this. Our sun is the right color that allows photosynthesis to take place in sufficient volumes so that 8 billion people on our planet have the right air and enough air to breathe. Have you ever thought about the fact that as our population keeps doubling and growing and growing and growing, we never grow out of air? No one ever says as a baby comes here, oh no, that one is going to take my air. We don't even think about that. In our mind, air is a sort of unlimited capacity. Why do we think that? Well, while we may not understand the creative foundations of it, in actuality what is happening is God has designed a perfect system with our sun, our earth, our moon, I'll get to in just a moment, so that even the very color of out of all of the billions of stars that exist, our planet, where life is attached to a parent star that's the right color, so that we have enough photosynthesis taking place to have air. Not only do we talk about the color of our sun, but the distance that the earth and the sun have from each other. If it were closer, that's not going to be good. The planet's going to be too warm. We're going to have an unstable water cycle. If we're further, again, too cool, unstable water cycle. With an unstable water cycle, it doesn't matter the color of the sun producing enough air. If you don't have water, we die. Thinking about the inclination, the way our Earth is inclined in its orbit, this affects our temperatures. The axis of the Earth is inclined at an angle of 23 degrees to the plane of its orbit around the sun, gives rise to seasons. If we change that angle, the temperature on Earth becomes a great deal hotter or colder, and plant life either burns up or freezes. When you don't have the plant life, you don't have us breathing out carbon dioxide and the plants and stuff giving us back oxygen. Again, there's a symbiotic design in our creation. And then just the orbital eccentricity. We don't go around the sun in a complete circle or a perfect circle. It's more elliptical, more of an oval than a circle. By design, that type of travel is perfect for the variation of seasons. And we need the seasons for the different plants to go through their cycles. The argument then, you can see this in William Lane Craig's book, is just fine tuning. There's these just little bitty indicators where if something was just a little bit off, life as we know it couldn't exist. And so I either have to have faith that randomly all of this took place, or I have my reason to trust the observation that the appearance of design indicates there's a designer. The more we learn about our world, the more evidence for design we see. The further out in space our telescopes look, the more intricate our microscopes become, the greater the evidence for design we have. Stephen Meyer wrote a book, more on a scientific level, called The Signature in the Cell. So we're looking out here at this design in the universe. Stephen Meyer takes it to the micro level and says, just look at the design in one cell, and then you can branch out and look at the design in DNA coding and all of these. And so from the macro vision of our universe, our stars, the moon and the way it affects the tides, and the sun, the way it affects our water cycles and the photosynthesis process, from the macro, now coming down to the very micro details, from the one extreme to the other, what you have in between all that, elements of design. In 1996, Time magazine published their famous God is Dead story. During that same year, atheist Carl Sagan announced there were two known requirements for life to exist: the right kind of star, the right distance from that star. And that brought great optimism to the scientific community, because maybe they would find other planets that had those same two criterion. Instead, the information today, the data today, points to the fact that of all the planets in the universe, this one is incredibly fine-tuned for life. There's a lot more we could discuss, and I'll leave that to reading on your own, a lot more, but basically the teleological argument gives us an evidence of design. The psalmist was right. The heavens declare the glory of God. The psalmist was also right when he said, what is man? Thou art mindful of him. What is man? At his very micro level, he is a being that shows evidence of design. The universe we live as if it were balanced on a razor's edge. Such incredible design. Imagine a scenario where you come into my office, I'm waiting for you, and on my desk, there's a simple, ordinary pen. It's standing straight up. It's perfectly balanced. From an illustrative point, I think we'd probably both agree that's practically impossible. It'd be very difficult. You can eventually do it, but rarely is that going to happen on your first attempt to just get that pen to stay perfectly balanced in the stand. But humor me for just a moment. If you did see something like that, you would know immediately that it didn't just happen. Drop a pen from the ground. Do it 100 times, do it 1,000 times, do it 10,000 times. Tell me how many times when you drop it does it land straight up and stay on a flat surface. Now if you're dropping it in sand and you have some weight on it, maybe you can drive it into the sand, that's cheating. Okay. The point is, randomly dropping it, it's going to fall over. It may fall over different directions, but it's going to fall over. So if you walk into my office and it's standing straight up and down, perfectly balanced, you would know it was deliberate, it was intentional, and someone did it. It would have all of the trademarks, all of the evidence pointing to somebody did that. The math and the science would point to the fact that without outside interference, that would be impossible. In other words, there was a designer, a person involved who made that happen. If we can understand that at such a small little illustration of a pen, how much more should we understand it from the element of this vast universe that we live in? Now, for encouragement, the power of this argument. There was a famous atheist, renowned atheist, an older atheist, talking about this man was alive when C.S. Lewis was alive, and actually engaged with him and debated him. C.S. Lewis, a great apologist. And Lewis passed on. This man lived on into the 2010s. I'm not sure if he's still living now, but his name is Anthony Flew. F-L-E-W, Anthony Flew. Anthony Flew, devout atheist. He rejected his atheism, though, recently in the sense of a decade ago, and accepted a theistic worldview, citing the evidence for design as his reason. Even people like Dawkins says that the strongest argument for a theistic worldview is design, teleological, because there's no alternative explanation that's satisfying mathematically. Now, this argument of order and design moved an atheist to a theist. Notice, it did not move him from an atheist to a Christian. It moved him from an atheist to a theist. At best now, he is agnostic. He says, I know that maybe there's a God, but I don't know if he wants to do anything with me. I don't know if he wants to interact with me. I don't know if he wants any interaction. I don't know if I can know him personally. Maybe I'm like a deist in that sense. So while we've made progress, the argument for God's existence doesn't get over the hurdle of, yes, and the God who exists is Jehovah God, who gave his son Jesus to die for you. You're not going to see that necessarily. So let me give you one quick argument to consider as well, and then we'll take a break, and I'll come back and share one final argument with you in the next lecture. This is called the axiological argument. It's the argument from morality. So basically, if there are moral laws, then by definition, there should be a moral lawgiver. In Romans chapter 1, Paul argues for order and design, creation. He says, and maybe we could call it a cosmological argument for that matter even. But in Romans chapter 2, he argues for a axiological argument for God's existence because he talks about conscience. Conscience renders people without excuse. Conscience literally means in Latin, with knowledge. All of humanity is born with some innate knowledge of right and wrong. And then what we do with that and how we shape that conscience affects our worldview going forward. We're all born with a conscience. And even as consciences get seared, do you know there are still some, I'm going to say it, moral absolutes that we want to hold to in all societies? Whenever I ask somebody a question, hey, if you died today, do you know for sure you'd go to heaven? Oh, yeah, I'd go to heaven. I'm a good person. Oh, okay, well, why do you think that you're a good person? And obviously, they're not. I know that scripturally, but it's amazing how many times this is the response I get when I ask that question. Well, I've never killed anybody. And I usually laugh, so let's not start today, right? And we'll have a little bit of a chuckle there, and then I'll move into the idea of what sin really is. But it is amazing to me that if somebody claims to be an atheist, I've had people claim to be pagan, I've had people claim to be Wiccan, I've had people who claim to be New Age, Buddhist, Mormon, you name the worldview. When I lived in California for 27 years, I met them all. And all of them believed morally it was wrong to kill. Now, where does that moral law come from? Here's the geometrical, we call these arguments. Remember, we had these premises, and we just sort of worked through these logical arguments. It goes something like this. If God did not exist, objective values and duties would not exist. Objective values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. This is sort of the idea. So, if there are objective moral values, then by definition, that moral value, that objective value, must be coming from an objective standard. So how do people try to get around that? Well, first of all, there's this argument of utilitarianism. Just society defines what's right and wrong. It's sort of the survival of the fittest, and majority rules. Social groups decide what's right and wrong. But now think about that. 150 years ago, in our country, the land of the free, home of the brave, not everybody was free. Not everybody. In our country, slavery, the evil of slavery, had a grip. And then you had people stand up against that. Ironically, and I believe rightfully, we herald those types of people, a William Wilberforce, a Martin Luther King Jr. In the issues of equal rights for all colors and the abolishment of slavery, we would hold these guys up, in that light at least, as heroes. But if utilitarianism is correct, they're not heroes, because society had already decided what was right, and they were going against it, so they should be branded as rebels, not heroes. You said, but that's different. No, it's not. In those illustrations, we have the idea that even when society is wrong, our conscience knows the difference. And some people with character and mental fortitude and moral fortitude will stand up and let their voice be heard to make a difference, to change things for right. Nelson Mandela went against the society norms. King went against the societal norms. Wilberforce went against the societal norms. And again, there's so many other illustrations there as well. Again, let's talk about majority moral rules, and the majority sets the agenda. If that's true, then during the World War II era, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. There was this thing called the Holocaust, which is just a Jewish word for burnt offering. It's the Hebrew word. It means a burnt offering. Whenever we talk about the Holocaust, that's what we're literally calling. The Jewish people were made as a burnt offering. Literally, not just metaphorically. And some people chose to stand against that and call it out as evil. Well, obviously it's evil. Why though? Why? Because there was a majority of people who thought it was okay. Why could we objectively say it was wrong? From Hitler's point of view, eradicating the Jewish people out of the societal gene pool was better for mankind. There was a utilitarian purpose to it. The same argument can be made today for aborting babies that we know will have Down syndrome or deficiencies, or assisted suicides and mercy killings and euthanasia. They all have this same premise. And a utilitarian perspective can never have an objective worldview. It's always subjective. Not what's best for the world. We may couch it in that language, really what's best for the people making the decisions. If you ever question the horror of the Holocaust, I hope one day you take a trip to Israel, and I hope you walk through the Holocaust Museum there. And if you can't get to Jerusalem, there's Holocaust museums in many places here in America. And to walk through that, it's pretty sobering. The summary of the moral argument: there's objective values, there's objective laws that are absolute. These stem from a moral lawgiver. Let's stop there, and we'll come back and pick up with this in our next lecture. Okay? God bless.